Welcome to Talk of the Bay. This is Suki Wessling, and I am sitting in for George Cadman today, who is not feeling well. We are going to have a really interesting show to get today. Two guests. First guest for the first half an hour is going to be talking about the Movement Voter Project. And the second half an hour, we are going to have an actor named Wayne Harris, who is doing a fundraiser in Santa Cruz coming up for the Movement Voter Project. So first you'll find out about what this organization does. And then in the second half, we will talk about this show that is coming. It's called Drapetomania, and it's a benefit for the Movement Voter Project, and it's coming on Saturday, June 6th at 7 p.m. at the London Nelson Community Center, and I will give you information about it, more information about it. You can look it up now if you want at wayneharris.net. So I would like to welcome our first guest, who is Hallie Montoya Tansey from the Movement Voter Project. Are you there, Hallie?
Hi there, Suki. I'm here.
Yay! One technical thing did not go wrong. We've been having this crazy situation where one of our signals was off the air. So, it's like life in community radio. Well, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Tell us a little bit about the Movement Voter Project, what it is.
Yes, great. So, Movement Voter Project is a national organization. We raise money from individual donors mostly, and we channel it towards the most impactful local organizing and movement building organizations around the country. You could think of us like a mutual fund for political giving. We send most of our dollars to the federal battleground states that are always extremely competitive for the presidency, for the Senate, also to areas that have consistently competitive U.S. House races. And we are supporting community organizations, grassroots organizations that build bases of people to transform the politics of the place that they're in. They work on issues, they develop leaders, and they also work on elections.
Uh-huh. And what size are these organizations? What's the range of what you work with?
Gosh, that really varies. We definitely have organizations we work with whose budgets are, less than $1 million a year, whose staffs are fairly small. We've also supported larger organizations to do this sort of work. One example, I used to handle our funding in Nevada, where we supported the Culinary Union, Unite Here, which is a powerhouse union in Nevada that does a really amazing political work. So that's obviously a much larger organization.
Uh-huh. And what are some examples of what the different organizations do? I mean, obvious would be just canvassing, door knocking, but what else do they do?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So the organizations that we support, definitely canvass during elections, but also do really a year-round model of what we call power building. So they are in the community, when it's election season, when it's not election season, working to, first of all, organize a base of people. So to give some examples, we support an organization in Maine called the Maine Mobile Home Campaign that organizes mobile home residents in Maine to work on getting rent stabilization to bring down their rents. We've supported organizations in Montana on mental health to get mental health crisis response in their state. We supported organizations on who are working on Medicaid expansion. They're really working with community members on the issues that matter the most to them, to change people's lives, and through that to transform the politics of their place. So that looks like building community, working people up through what we call a ladder of engagement to grow their commitment to the organization, to bring in their own networks and build that base. They work on policy advocacy, whether it's at the local level, the state level, or the federal level. And then come election time, they work on elections.
Mm-hmm. And can you give us some examples of some of the successful things that have been built with your support?
Sure. Actually, right here in California, we in 2024, well, actually, if I can take it back to 2022, your listeners may remember that, um, you know, we in California, we really, I'd say nationally, beat the odds for the US House and did better than would have been expected in a tough midterm cycle in 2022, but we lost five competitive congressional elections in California. We also lost a significant number of competitive congressional elections in New York. And between California and New York, those losses meant we were not able to control the House coming out of the elections in 2022. Movement Voter Project, as well as our friends at the California Donor Table and the Working Families Party, looked at the situation and said, you know, California often is a place that politicians come to fundraise, but actually, there's a lot of important competitive federal elections right here coming up again in 2024. We want to flip these seats. We, Movement Voter Project has been supporting grassroots organizations in these geographies for a long time individually. But what we decided is we needed a space to align and coordinate that work and to do it bigger than has ever been. Than has ever been done before, in terms of bringing the various community and labor organizations together in the competitive congressional districts in California in 2024. We raised $5 million that we put into those programs, and we had labor partners, community partners doing really more canvassing, more voter outreach than had ever been done on those House races before. And we actually ended up flipping all but one.
Wow.
So, yes, so that was an incredible victory. As now the maps have changed a lot. There's fewer competitive elections
I
than there
was,
used to be in the House of
yeah.
California now than there was, but we've still
So,
got a couple here at CD 22 in the Central Valley and District 48 down in the San Diego and Imperial Empire area, and we are going to be working to flip those um, races as well this year, again through Battleground California.
interesting. So, yeah, the redistricting that happened, we have pretty well educated listeners, but I'm assuming that they all know that this happened because California suspended our politically neutral line drawing committee, and now we are going for trying to squeak out as many seats to counter what was done in Texas.
Yeah.
What's happening? Well, first of all, does it look? You said there's two seats that still look competitive.
Yes. So we
Okay.
had, quite a few more competitive seats in the past. Now the district lines in California are much more favorable to Democrats than they were. But there is still CD 22, where David Valadao is the Republican incumbent in that district. And then we've got CD 48 as well down near San Diego, and unfortunately, I'm blanking on the name
That's
of that
okay.
district right now. But that's the other one where we've got a new opportunity to flip the seat. Oh yeah, sorry, that's Daryl Issa's seat.
Okay. Oh, Daryl Issa's
He
seat.
used to,
Wow.
he used to be quite in a quite solidly red district
Okay.
in the past, and wasn't really a target. And at this point, his district is much more favorable for Democrats than it was in the past.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because as someone who wants our politics to be healthy and fair, I actually think that competition's excellent. And I like to hear that someone Daryl Issa's been in that seat for a long time, that he's going to have to compete for it. And I'd love to
Yes,
see that
definitely.
more. But
Yes, I think our partners, many of the partners we worked with in Battleground, California, and who worked up to also pass Prop 50 last year, were so, it was a bittersweet moment that also fought directly to get the independent redistricting commission established, and definitely believers in the value of competition and in fair maps. But I think we saw with what happened in Texas just prior to that, we didn't want to bring a butter knife to a gunfight with Trump. And I think, now as you see what the Supreme Court has done to the Virginia redistricting, as well as their recent ruling in Calais, the Prop 50 passing and the seats we've gained in California, um, are really an important part of what's keeping us, competitive for the House this cycle.
Hmm. So your organization funds organizations all over the country.
Yeah.
How are organizations that are Democrat leaning in these states that have redistricted, how are they feeling? Do you get a sense of their mood right now and whether they're fired up? Or I mean, you read all different things in the news, so.
We have seen since all through last year, there have been really a string of um, victories for Democrats and Democrats overperforming expectations in lots of geographies. Last year, for example, Virginia, which is an important bellwether, typically, which had a Republican governor previously, as well as Republican control in one house of their legislature. Democrats swept those elections last year. We had victories in the Pennsylvania and Wisconsin Supreme Court, um, as well as many, many special elections, smaller special elections in lots of places last year. Actually, an important one in Georgia, the Public Service Commission, which regulates utilities, was an important victory for climate we had last year. Really, like up and down the ballot, as well as Mamdani winning in New York City. We're seeing lots of evidence that the pendulum would swing back. I think that what is important to our partners and what's important to Movement Voter Project is to see we're not interested in just let's say, a U-turn out of authoritarianism that gets us back to the same old democracy we had before Trump.
Mhm.
We are interested in fighting for a democracy that's better than what we've ever had. And so, while yes, the midterms are important, this is going to put a really important check on this authoritarian moment that we're in, give us better defensive tools to fight with. We know that, Democrats in many ways have not delivered change that is meaningful in people's lives, and that we need to deliver that, and we need to build a democracy that's better than what we had before if we're going to fight back authoritarianism in a sustainable way, as well as really deliver what people need.
Mhm. So I'll take a break here just to tell listeners that you're listening to Talk of the Bay. I'm Suki Wessling in for George Cadman, who is out today, and this is KSQD, of course. I'm speaking to Hallie Montoya Tansey, and we are talking about the Movement Voter Project, which I'm going to point out something that George pointed out to me when I talked to her about this show. She said, PACs sort of have a bad reputation, but you're a PAC. So can you talk about what a PAC is and why it's not necessarily all bad?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. So, and I should say, we have multiple entities that we do our work through. So we have entities spanning from nonpartisan to partisan, and including a PAC. But I will say it's about PACs. So PACs are organizations that are allowed to spend money on partisan politics to communicate in a partisan way about elections. And I'll say this, if you want to contrast this type of money to nonpartisan money, so what your listeners might be familiar with as a 501c3 or a charitable nonprofit, when that type of organization is doing outreach to voters, they cannot talk about things in a partisan way. And I don't know, Suki, if you remember the game Taboo. like the board game
Huh.
where you have like a word you're trying to get people to guess.
Oh,
And then
okay.
there's like the list of words that's closest to it that you can't say. Like you're trying to get people to guess Christmas, and you can't say Santa Claus or Jesus Christ or, Christmas tree or whatever. That's basically what trying to communicate about an election with nonpartisan dollars is. You can't say climate or abortion or the name of the candidate. Um, and so it's really difficult to communicate in a clear way. PAC dollars are what allow our partners to communicate with the people in their communities and say what they mean about elections. Now, there's obviously lots of different kinds of PACs, right? You've got like big industry PACs. In California this year, there's like huge PAC money coming from all sorts of AI companies, as an example, right? There's obviously like the National Realtors and the Restaurant Association. There's like lots of industry PACs, and lots of that type of money, I think, is what gives PACs a bad name, right? It's like, honestly, accelerating the corporate capture of our democracy, and making our elected officials like unclear about what side their bread is buttered on, right? um but PAC money at its most basic is just the type of money that allows people to communicate in a clear way about what's at stake in elections. And so we believe like we need that type of money to enable grassroots movement groups to communicate with voters in their communities about what's at stake. Because honestly, elections can be confusing, right? Like you read the California ballot just as well as I do. And it's often hard to know how to interpret it all. And so
Uh,
we have to be able to communicate about it in a clear way.
the other day, a friend of mine texted just a picture of the governor page. That was like
Right.
self-explanatory. Oh my God, what kind of state do we live in? It's
Yeah.
like a fourfold, for people who haven't looked at it. It's this enormous thing full of all of these names. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um, Go
So
ahead.
as far as I wanted to say I haven't said your URL. You're at movement.vote. So
That's great.
if anyone wants to look up, so you have a PAC arm. You also have a 501c3 arm. So
And a
how do
501c4, yes.
and so how do you do that? Isn't that an awkward dance?
Actually, having multiple entities to do different types of work is quite typical of organizations in our state. We obviously have different purposes with the different funds that we have, but yeah, it's definitely possible.
Hmm. Do you have to, sort of check your vocabulary at the door? You were saying that you can't speak the same way when you're talking for a nonprofit as opposed to a PAC.
Yes, that's right. A 501c3 nonprofit is not permitted to do partisan politics of any type. But I think, as I described to you earlier, our partners do lots of different types of work. And so, for example, the policy work that they do, the leadership development and base building work that they do, even some types of voter outreach, some voter registration programs, for example, are all nonpartisan programs. It's really a limited slice of the work that our partners do that is partisan.
Hmm. So you mentioned earlier the idea that, the redistricting that we've done here in California isn't exactly what many people were hoping for. And in fact, I'm going to say this in a nonpartisan way. There are plenty of people who believe that we'd all be better off if all of our states had nonpartisan redistricting. But it is mostly a push from liberals to do that. What are some of the things that you think, once we get past the immediate threat that led to these changes, what are some things that people are talking about that the Democrats have to do to rebuild the trust? You mentioned the corporate money and the problem with that. Can you talk a little bit about your group and also the organizations you fund that are trying to look past the midterms?
Yes, definitely. So our partners, as I've mentioned, are interested in power building for communities. I think at the end of the day, and actually this is like an interesting thing about political money as well. Maybe I'll explain um, you know, politicians receive direct contributions often from these industry PACs that are, I think have an influence, obviously, on how they
Mhm.
make decisions. And in order for us to get the changes that we know our communities need, we have to build a counterbalance to that power. I'll give you an example of probably the most successful work that MVP has done over the last 10 years in the state is in Minnesota. So it's been a while since Minnesota was a battleground state, but they were 10, 15 years ago, at one of the main battleground states, they were often, their legislature was often controlled by Republicans. They often had Republican governors. And they also had plenty of corporate moderate Democrats in their legislature. And um, our partners over the last 10 years in Minnesota worked a very disciplined, very ambitious power building program. Some of those organizations were Faith in Minnesota or Isaiah, which is an organizer of congregations, Unidos Minnesota, which organizes the Latino community, and SEIU, which is many folks will be familiar with, as a service employees union, um, built power together, aligned around long-term interests, and they won basically over time. They won control of the legislature in a way where they had built deep relationships with the people that they elected, and also with their governor, Tim Walz, who, when they won a trifecta finally, and they had the governor and both houses of the legislature in 2023, they passed more progressive legislation in one session, one legislative session, so 90 days, than really any legislature has ever passed. Probably,
Wow.
more legislation, like more powerful legislation. You can really find only an analog in like the New Deal.
Hmm.
They got driver's license for undocumented immigrants. They got free school lunches. They got automatic voting rights restoration for formerly incarcerated people. You could list, I mean, you could go on and on with all the things that they won. And um, that's really what we're trying to do, basically, is to build the power that we need and the relationships that we need to have elected officials that are truly accountable to communities and making the changes that really transform their lives. And I think when you do make those changes and you do effectively communicate about with voters and with community members about why those changes happen so people understand it, that's what can make political change durable.
Hmm. And as far as communication goes, what what are the trends to try to break through the great wall of noise that we're all living in right now? Because that's one of the
Yeah.
concerns that I know
Yeah.
is really huge, is that people are getting their news from social media, and or talk shows and podcasts. I say this as someone who has a podcast. They are not necessarily the best place to get your news. How are you working to break through all of that?
I bet your podcast is a great place to get news. But,
Thank you.
yes, no, thank you for asking. I definitely think, I mean, the 24 elections showed nationally, I mean, it's just been a huge lesson learned from that election that progressives, the Democratic side, the more left-leaning side of politics has just been absolutely getting, um, you know, they've been getting their clock cleaned by the other side in terms of communicating digitally in the media, the investments that the right has made in that just absolutely dwarf the investments on our side.
Mhm.
And Movement Voter Project has been like many other funders on the left since 24 has been starting to invest more in media. There's still a long way to go, but we did hire a strategic media advisor. We created a media fund, and we have been making intentional investments in that space. To give one example, in 2025, when there were Supreme Court elections in Pennsylvania, I'd say I don't know if you agree with me, but I would say judicial elections are some of the most confusing elections that are ever on the
Yes.
ballot. So they were electing members of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Those are nonpartisan elections nominally. There's no, Democrat or
Mhm.
Republican written on the ballot. Um, there were definitely right aligned and left aligned judges,
Mhm.
though, and judges who wanted to fight for democracy and judges who didn't on the ballot. And um, the right was being very confusing about it. They knew that people wanted to elect judges who would fight to defend our democracy, and they would just send out, very misleading mailers
Yeah.
about who would do that. And so in Pennsylvania, we got together what we call the creator cohort. We organized basically creators local to Pennsylvania, popular social media personalities who we treated, just like you would organize any other group of people. Just like
Mhm.
you would organize donors or you would organize voters. We organized creators to, put out the real facts about that election, help decode it for their audiences,
Mhm.
and we saw real impact. We were also out our partners were also out knocking on doors at that time, and we would hear from them. Like, I was confused about this, and then I saw this thing about it. So it was like
Mhm.
really reaching
Excellent.
people. In new ways. And so that's just an example of the type of media work that we're investing in now that kind of aligns with the grassroots work that our
Mhm.
partners have long done.
All right. Well, thank you. I am speaking with Hallie Montoya Tanzi from the Movement Voter Project. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to movement.vote. And in the second half of the show, we are going to speak to an actor who has a one-man show, and he is going to be in Santa Cruz raising money for the Movement Voter Project. So thank you, Hallie. And I'm going to pass us off to a little music from our DJ and board op, David Bean here. And we will be back in a few minutes with Wayne Harris to talk about Drapetomania. This is Talk of the Bay. Talk of the Bay. I'm Suki Wessling in for George Cadman. And before we start up, I wanted to let you know about Friday's Talk of the Bay, which is going to actually not be Talk of the Bay. I am having a special episode of The Babblery, which is my show, which usually plays the fourth Monday at 6 p.m. Played last night at 6 p.m. But I have had such a great number of wonderful guests. I decided to put out an extra episode. And this one on Friday at 5 p.m., you will hear Cindy Cohen of the Electronic Freedom Foundation talking about privacy and free speech on the internet and about her experiences as a lawyer fighting for those things. Everything from cryptocurrency to breastfeeding forums. It's a great conversation. That's Friday at 5. All right, back to Talk of the Bay. I am pleased to be able to bring to you this couple of very interesting people who intersect in one spot, but are quite different. We just heard from Hallie Montoya Tanzi from the Movement Voter Project. And now we have got on the phone, I hope, Wayne Harris. Wayne, are you there?
Yes, Suki, I'm here.
Good. There he is. It's always very nice when I actually hear the voice in response. So, Wayne, tell us a little bit about yourself and your fundraiser that's going to be in Santa Cruz on June 6th for the Movement Voter Project.
Absolutely. And Suki, thanks so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to the performance of June 6th at the London Nelson Community Center in collaboration with MVP. Um, I've been writing and performing now for quite a while, doing everything from solo performance to musical theater. Um, my my journey has taken me to everywhere from teaching marching bands to managing school buses throughout my years. So it's been a journey, and it's kind of what informs the work that I'm doing now in terms of writing and performing storytelling.
Uh-huh. So, okay, go ahead.
Well, I should have put a period.
So you tell us a little bit about the performing that you do. This is a solo show, right? One that you wrote yourself?
Yes, yes. Um, I've been in the same workshop group. I got to do a shout out to the Club Solo workshop group that I've probably been with now for 20 years. And most of the pieces that I have done over that period of time, I've developed with that group of people, which includes my director, David Ford. And kind of been doing a lot of this work at the Marsh Theater in San Francisco and Berkeley,
Hmm.
and have had, you know, solo performance is anything but a solo effort.
Yeah.
And so I've had a great network of performers, producers that I've worked at, over this time. I also do work in schools. I take storytelling workshops to various schools in the Bay Area, as well as working with senior programs in terms of bringing their stories to fruition, and that's been a real joy over the years.
Wonderful. So, how start us from the beginning. How did you get the spark of this show and how did you build it and then what has it become?
Mm. Well, every production I've done has its own, uh, you know, catalyst, its own reason for being. But this piece in particular kind of grew out of the frustration of uh, post-election America. Um, I, Tuki, I found myself being very angry every day,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not how I move through the world. I've been blessed to have had a mother who kind of showed me joy,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I kind of approached life in that way, and I just found myself being angry, like a lot of us, and not really focusing that anger very well, and looking for a way to channel that energy. Um, I sat down with my director, David Ford, and uh, actually at the time we were almost finishing up another play, a whole different play, and I was negotiating with theaters as to when we were going to put it on and all of that good stuff. But I just didn't feel like that's what I needed to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to David, and I went to the theater that was expecting uh, one show and told them I wanted to work on a piece that seemed to be asking to be told.
Mm-hmm.
And the folks at the Marsh Theater were very open to the idea, and David and I and the Club Solo Workshop went to work. Um, the piece itself, Drapetomania, in some ways is very nonlinear. And I think that reflects my process as I look over my time on this earth. As I look back, it kind of came to me in shards
Mm-hmm.
of memories, of moments, of feelings. And so we looked for a way to kind of tie all of those pieces together. And the way we've done it is to utilize a trip I took to Palestine back in 2012 as kind of the spine of the piece,
Mm-hmm.
because so many of the experiences that I had while moving through the West Bank and being in the Middle East for the very first time, and things just kind of really being revelatory for me. It I could see how it connected to my journey over the years, and how it became uh, a way of looking at the challenges we have now in a larger landscape, a much more universal
Uh-huh.
way.
Did you
Uh,
what sort of things really struck you as things that made you think about the U.S. when you were there?
well, I was I had no idea the level of oppression
Mm-hmm.
that I saw there. Like I'm sure most people, we've all been aware that there's been some real challenges going on in the Middle East, and we're all aware, that there is that problem. But being there and seeing the walls, for instance, Suki, is is shocking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Talking with Palestinians who have to have a permit to go 50 miles from Jenin, say, to Jerusalem. Seeing uh, IDF vehicles moving through East Jerusalem perpetually with their lights going, whether or not there's something going on, these lights are going on around it. And it felt oppressive in a way that felt familiar
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how policed many Black communities are. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing those blue cop cars, Concord, California, and I started to see more and more the connection between the level of oppression for people of color, marginalized folks in general here in the U.S., and what was, granted, more blatantly oppressive, with a wall, but we
Mm-hmm.
have our walls here,
Yeah.
and we've had them forever, since redlining, since redistricting of urban areas, and it felt like there was just a small jump from what we were experiencing, and it being even more literal in terms of the Palestinian experience.
Mm-hmm. So you said that was 10 years before you started writing this. So how did it percolate up? What was it that you said that the election was at the 2024 election that
Yeah,
spurred this?
yes, it was the last election.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And I'm going to point out, just for those people who maybe young listeners don't realize, that when you went to Palestine, most Americans did not know the extent to which there was a system of control there. Some people would say apartheid would describe it, and most Americans didn't know that at that time. So we're all much more educated about what's going on there now. So I just wanted to interject that in case anyone was thinking, well, duh, you should have known that.
yeah, and yes, it was quite revealing to me.
Mm-hmm.
There was also a kinship with with the kind of uh, ability of the Palestinians to deal with that oppression. There was still life and joy and creativity, and I just, it became such a familiar feel for
Mm-hmm.
me. That was a little bit surprising.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, coming out of the election and wanting to to take a look at my own journey. How did we get to that point?
Mm-hmm.
The maybe the first time around, that classic saying of, fool me once. Well, it really was hard for me to understand how we had been fooled twice,
Mm-hmm.
and how we had gotten to this point. And I realized that I was as much a part of the problem as anyone actually voting for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I was as much of a problem due to my lack of participation in the process, and long before the 24 election.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm not a young person, Suki. uh, and so looking back over my life, it wasn't quite a Forrest Gump journey, but because of my age, I've been around during some pretty major watershed moments
Mm-hmm.
in history. And taking a look at how I participated in those moments, I saw that I came up lacking.
Yeah. I wanted to take a break here just to let people know that you're listening to Talk of the Bay on KSQD, K-Squid. And I am speaking with actor Wayne Harris about his one-man show, now I've said it wrong. Drapetomania. There we go. Drapetomania, which is coming to the London Nelson Center on June 6th at 7 p.m. If you are interested in attending this, it is a benefit for the Movement Voter Project. So those of you who are still tuning in from the first half will know that I spoke to Hallie Montoya Tansey from the Movement Voter Project about their work. They do a lot of great work here in California and all around the country. And you can get a link to the tickets just by going to wayneharris.net. And this is Wayne Harris himself. So you have a video, a promo for the show up, and I noticed that you seem to use some historical texts. How did you go about putting this show together?
Well, I love to kind of dig into research, and because this period kind of scans 60 years, it was an opportunity to kind of really look back into moments. I did not know much about Dr. Cartwright, who is the kind of guy who brings the idea of Drapetomania to the forefront.
Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Well, in 1851, Dr. Samuel T. Cartwright was a physician in Louisiana, and he came up with an idea that this problem that many of the plantation were experiencing of enslaved Africans running away. He came up with the idea that this running away was because of a mental illness. And he created an entire science around Drapetomania. Because Suki, it was based on the premise that slavery was such an improvement in the lives of enslaved Africans that only those suffering from a mental illness, right, would wish to escape. And so he built this whole idea around it. And actually, it was still in certain medical journals at 1914.
Well, I'll tell you, I think the state of Florida is adding that to their school curriculum this year.
I don't know. It seems that way. And as I started to kind of dig into uh, how accepted that idea was, how it intertwined with religion and with racism, it was just one of those you can't turn your head away from a auto accident kind of
Mm-hmm.
situation. But the more I kind of dug into uh, the 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 ideas about how you cure this, the ideas about how you can recognize the sulkiness and dissatisfaction on the face of your slaves, and just seeing this, it reminded me so much of the pseudoscience that we're dealing with today.
Mm.
That all of a sudden we've kind of walked backwards into a dark age here. And so, even the connection between uh, Cartwright's idea and what we're now seeing in terms of vaccination, in terms of MAHA, I believe it's called,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a retro um, movement. It also kind of rang true to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the same with some of the other stories. When I was in Palestine, I was sharing the story of Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. I had written a piece about that letter, which is what I was performing.
Mm-hmm.
And looking into the history of the Birmingham boycotts, researching that and kind of connecting to that history, the famous Children's Crusade uh, uh, was during that time in 1963. And so it, just having a chance to kind of sit with those moments, those children in that church, and working to tell their stories has just been a blessing as
Mm-hmm.
well. It the story kind of moves through time. My brother was in Vietnam while I was at home trying to be a hippie. You know, I had heard about all the free love stuff. I was told.
You were looking forward to a little free love.
Yes, I was.
And how big was your afro? Do you have a
Very
good one?
big.
Good. I was a child during the hippie movement. I just figure if you were a hippie, you really just needed to go for it, right?
Mm. It was, yes, it was a moment, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, ignoring the fact that my own brother was being swallowed up by an
Yeah.
illegal war,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm thinking about getting laid, and it just it was one of those moments. There's another moment where I'm with a musician friend I had met in East Jerusalem, who was a tabla drummer in a quartet that played traditional Arabic music, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he was also a drummer in a Palestinian alternative rock band, and we were talking, and he was complaining about the fact that he could not get permits to get to other cities because the Israelis don't give out permits. The
Mm-hmm.
Palestinians to move 50 miles north, and it instead of being in that moment and realizing what he was saying, this fellow artist was telling me he's not allowed to tell his stories.
Mm-hmm.
I I suggested that what you need is that you need a Schindler's List. You got to have a fiddler on the roof to get people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And even though that may be true, unfortunately, I look back on that moment and go, I really didn't understand or appreciate what was being said, the gravity of the moment.
Mm-hmm. But then now we have the situation where you're seeing parallels here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, the Save America Act alone has the potential to require IDs, require a level of control that I don't think we're we're fully prepared for.
Yeah. So
And
I want to just let listeners know again about your show. It is a benefit for the Movement Voter Project, Saturday, June 6th at 7 p.m. at London Nelson Community Center. And you can get more information and tickets at wayneharris.net. That's Wayne Harris, spelled exactly as you would imagine, .net. And I wanted to ask you one final question, and that is, when your audience walks out the door that night, you mentioned feeling angry and that you knew that wasn't a productive emotion to have. What do you want them to take with them, and how would you like them to, what do you want them to leave with?
In sharing this piece, it's the engagement with the audience, the connection with the audience has been just a thing of beauty. And, in solo theater, boy, you don't want to, lecture. In solo theater, you don't want to be an angry black man for 5 minutes. You want to get certain ideas across through storytelling, through, one of the things I believe, the largest stories in the world, D-Day or 9/11, they all come down to individual stories, individual people's experience during that large event. And there are lots of large events during this piece that I'm sharing the smaller stories in the hope that people seeing my journey can see themselves in my journey, and hopefully can also see the potential of us being more than couch allies, of recognizing that I mentioned in the play, there is a difference between being an ally and being a collaborator. And so I'm hoping that by me sharing my story, that those that are witnessing it, listening to it, can see themselves in that story and see their way towards activism.
All right.
So I'd like them to go out determined, unafraid, and to some level joyful.
Yeah. Well, that's something I think that's just so important for everyone to focus on, is that we can't do good work in the world if we are stuck in anger, doom loop thinking, and we really need to find things that give us joy. And so I love to hear you use that word. And I want to thank you again for talking with us. This has been Wayne Harris, and I really appreciate your being with us on Talk of the Bay.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to coming to Santa Cruz. Hope to see all of y'all.
All right. Excellent. Coming up next, we have Luigi, the computer man.
My name is Luigi Opido, owner-operator of Pleasure Point Computers and the host of the Computer Man Show, a one-hour call-in show Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Viruses, slowdowns, scams, and updates. Computers can be a pain, and I'll help you through it.
Send me an email with your request. If it's hardware you want, baby, I'm the best.
If it has an on switch, we'll probably talk about it on the Computer Man Show Tuesdays at 6 p.m. only on KSQD 90.7 FM Santa Cruz.
Get into a computer.
That should be coming up shortly. Thank you, Suki Wessling, for sitting in on Talk of the Bay today. It's time now for California sanctuaries and oil just before we return to Luigi.
2024, Bill Duro served as West Coast Director of the National Marine Sanctuary Program. There are 6 national marine sanctuaries that he oversaw, including Olympic Coast off Washington State and California's 5 sites, including Greater Farallones, Cordell Bank, Monterey Bay, Chumash Heritage, and Channel Islands. He also oversaw the work these national marine sanctuaries do collaboratively, such as whale disentanglement, joint research projects, and a unique voluntary program to slow down cargo ships to avoid striking whales. Duros recently wrote a paper on the types of protection that California's 5 national marine sanctuaries provide against proposed new offshore oil and gas development. Monterey Bay, for example, has 8 levels of protection within its rules and the statute that created it. It's a reminder of all the thought and work behind the creation and management of each of the 18 national marine sanctuaries that cover 629,000 square miles of ocean and Great Lakes waters. Besides providing research, education, and outreach, as well as resource protection, they protect regional economies and the environment from activities that can cause harm. For the KSQD Ocean Report, this is Dan Hayflake.
KSQD Santa Cruz, KSQT Prunedale. The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
I love Computer Man. I'm the Macintosh man with the virus scan. Moving your files all across the land. Some Photoshop filters in After Dark. Get your Microsoft Office, Express your Quark. Millions of colors with a VRAM chip. How about a system crash that'll make you flip? I love Computer Man. Let's go. I'm saying Windows 95 is plug and play. If it's fonts you want, you gotta go to Macway. Log right on as my personal guest. You have Macintosh software on your desk. Send me an email with your request. If it's hardware you want, baby, I'm the best. I love Computer.
Good evening, K-Squid listeners. Good evening, Santa Cruz, Monterey, Central Coast, and beyond. My name is Luigi Opido, owner-operator of Pleasure Point Computers, right by the beach here in beautiful Santa Cruz, California. And for the next hour, I am your tour guide into a world of wonder, magic, information, and